Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Governed. This is actually our first interview that we've conducted in our new studio here, so it's a little bit of an experiment, and it's my honor to have in the studio with us today Representative Jim Walsh from the 19th Legislative District, and here to talk about the big changes, actually, in the Washington State Republican Party, and the fact that Caleb Heimlich just announced, and we're filming this on Tuesday, so he just announced yesterday that he's stepping down as chair, and you just announced today your interest in running for chair of the state Republican Party. So thank you so much for coming to the studio today, and thanks for giving us a chance to get to talk face to face, and tell my listeners and the viewers today how this process works, because I think a lot of people, we don't have this happen too often in the Republican Party. So tell us how this whole process works.
Well, first of all, you have to be crazy enough to want to do it, Glenn. And I've been in the state legislature now for going on 8 years. Mm-hmm. And so I've seen, before that, I was involved in the state party. I was the vice chair of the state party.
Right.
So I've seen a lot of the equation of how we do public policy and how we do government and politics in Washington. And when I heard that Caleb was going to be stepping down, I thought it was a good opportunity to pursue my bliss,
sure,
and try to help Republicans and really common sense people of any stripe, mm-hmm, in Washington State be effective and help fix what's broken.
Now let's, when I was looking at the Center Square press release of Caleb's announcement that he's stepping down, he did say he was going to stay on officially in that role until August 11th, because there's a regularly scheduled meeting of the state Republican board, right, on the 12th. Can you explain what happens on the 12th?
Oh, sure. So people ask, for these chairs of a political party, is this an election like for governor? Is this an election everybody can vote in? And the answer is no. No, the group, the people who vote for a party chair are the state committee of whichever party, whichever organization it is. Mm-hmm. In the case of the Republicans in Washington, the state committee is a group of about 120 people, basically representatives of each of the 39 counties. Okay. And they will send these state committee members from their county to the central committee meeting. Mm-hmm. And at that place, that universe of 117, 118 people are the ones who vote for really any piece of business, right, an important resolution, a change in the bylaws, or leadership. Okay. Now, normally the term of a state party chair is 2 years from a regularly scheduled organizational meeting that normally happens in January after a major election.
Okay.
So after a big November general election, then the organizational meeting, the regular ones, mm-hmm, are the following January.
Okay.
And that's a chance for a party to reboot, if it chooses to,
right,
after a November election. This is the same pattern that all the major parties follow. Mm-hmm. And the structure is similar. On the Democrat side, their state committee is larger than the Republicans. It has more people on it. They are focused on counties, but then they have other
ledge districts,
and,
right,
and they have some labor unions that are represented. So it's a different mix. So a larger universe there, a little bit smaller in the Republican side, which focuses more really exclusively on county representation. But the formula is the same.
Essentially, it's like the chair, the state committee woman, state committeeman, right, that are
from each county.
From each county, right.
Go to join the state committee.
Okay.
And then they will vote. Now, normally, as I said, the election for a chair and for other leadership positions happens in a 2-year cycle, right, after the major November election the year before.
So we just had one earlier this year.
Correct.
Yeah.
We had one earlier this year. Now, what'll happen is if a chair leaves in the middle of that term, there can be a special meeting called, mm-hmm, to vote for a new chair. Or, as in the case what we're seeing here in our situation, exiting chair may say, well, I will serve out until the next regularly scheduled quarterly meeting.
Okay.
The state committees meet on a regular quarterly basis
Okay.
during the year. In this case, the outgoing chair has said, I'll serve for about 8 weeks or so until the next regular meeting.
Which
and
is
then
August 12th.
it's the middle of August.
Yeah,
August
yeah.
12th.
Okay.
And so at that meeting, the state committee will gather and will elect a new chair who will take the reins of the party that day,
Okay.
basically.
So basically, since this has kind of come fairly suddenly, right, where Caleb's announced that he's stepping down, then basically you have about 7 weeks or so, give or take, of people deciding. Well, because I'm assuming you may not be the only person you're the first person that I'm aware of who's probably announced, but there could be other people there. So they can go, they can make their pitch, and those people who are in attendance, who hold those positions from the various counties, they're going to be able to vote. Is this something that can be observed by the public?
The meeting is generally open to the public. The public that attends, it might be a little media sometimes.
Right.
Generally, the public kind of sits in the back. They take place at usually some sort of hotel,
right,
in a ballroom or a big meeting room. And so the members, the 117, 118 members of the committee will be sitting kind of in the front of the room.
Sure.
And then there's room in the back for people to observe and watch. And
Okay.
Now, very rarely will they close a meeting to the public. That is something that can happen, but it doesn't usually happen. Usually they're open to the public.
Right. And then, do you know where that meeting is coming up?
It's supposed to be in Olympia, so
okay.
it'll be kind of close to the seat of all of our misery in the state of Washington.
Okay, yeah.
The thing we're trying to fix.
Right. So
they move around.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're in Olympia, sometimes they're in Tacoma, sometimes they're in Tri-Cities, Spokane.
but this one should be in Olympia.
That's the plan.
Okay.
Things could change between here and there, but I think that's how it'll go.
So probably the Red Lion, I would guess, or someplace. I
That's where
guess
it
they'll make an
usually is.
announcement.
Right.
So yeah, they'll make a public announcement. Okay. So now let's talk about your vision, because I saw your email that went out today, and as you mentioned in your email, Caleb's left the organization, or is leaving the organization, in good financial shape right now, and structurally pretty sound, which has not always been the case.
No, it hasn't.
With past chairs and
Sometimes it's a house on fire, and you have to do some real sort of triage and get the books straight and the organization straight. All that is in good shape, as you say. So we have the luxury of really going from a strong base to what's next.
So then the question is, right, based on I saw your announcement, there's a vision that you want to bring to the Republican Party in Washington State. So why don't you describe for our listeners what that vision is, and then if you could also lead into talking about fundraising, because that is a big part of the job here. And
it always is.
Yeah, and it always has been. So yeah.
Great question. I look at it as kind of three parts. First part is we need to change people's perception in Washington State of what Republican means, what it means to be a Republican. We've been reacting and counterpunching to a narrative set by other parties, other groups, for quite a long time. And that puts many people the impression, well, Republicans aren't really for anything, they're just against. They're the counter, they're the opposition to X or Y or Z. And so one of the things we have to do is say really what we're for, and say that strongly and clearly. And what we're for is we're for parents' rights and families. We're for really constitutional government. We have a brilliant constitution in the state of Washington.
Yeah, we do.
Superior in many ways, in my opinion, to the federal constitution in how it...
You wouldn't know that by how our Supreme Court acts.
It's shocking that we have this beautiful document and we don't honor it as well as we should.
Right.
Always. We want to get back to the Constitution and those notions of individual rights and of government and how government works and where government stops and where the people really retain most political power. We want to return to that sense of how you do government, of how you govern the state. A more of a servant's approach than a master's approach.
Right.
And what we've seen too much in Olympia with the current leadership is this idea of almost a kingly, or some would say tyrannical, dictating
Sure.
of government and how government works, rather than an approach that's servant-based. That is, you tell us, the people of Washington, what you want, and we will try to implement it as best we can.
Now, I've read, and this is more of a national issue, but I think it plays out in our state as well, that the makeup of the Republican Party, especially as it contrasts with the Democrat Party, has been going through a shift in the last 20 some odd years or so. I mean, it kind of varies on where you look at this, but most of the billionaires in Washington state are big Democrat supporters. They fund the Democrat Party and almost all the leftist causes in our state. Most of the wealthier exurbs or suburbs of Washington, Issaquah, Redmond, Kirkland, these areas are dominantly filled with very well off, Seattle, very well off Democrats, both in how they vote and how they give money. And the Republicans the trend has been more of a working, anybody that has to work for a living, middle class, who's forced to send their kids to public school financially, right? Whatever. That group of people has largely become more and more Republican in Washington state. Can you talk about how your message and what you would do as leader of the Republican Party to both recognize that and perhaps expand that constituency, I think, that we see in the Republican Party now?
Yeah, it is expand. Well, that's the nature of who I am and where I come from politically.
Right.
I mean, my district, the 19th district on the coast of Washington, before I was elected in 2016, was considered the blue wall, was considered a very blue Democrat, heavily Democrat district, because it was what you just described. It was real people, working people, middle class people, working class people, and had been for generations. Mm-hmm. And they knew of themselves and thought of themselves as Democrats. The truth is, Glenn, they didn't think of them as anything politically. They were just people. They were regular people. And they believed for generations that Democrats were the party that represented regular people.
Sure.
Well, that changed. And what we were able to do in the 19th was talk to people, listen to people, and persuade a whole bunch of voters and people in the district that they really shouldn't be voting Democrat because Democrats don't represent their values. At least Washington Democrats don't.
Right.
And that it's the Republicans, the common sense conservatives,
right,
who are the ones who are really like them, who want, good government, but not a big government. They want to be left alone with their families and their property, if they own some property, and their cars and their boats, and yes, their guns. They want to be left alone to live their lives as they want to live them and work their jobs as they want to live them. And they don't want a pushy governor, mincing in and telling them how they're supposed to live and where they're supposed to work and what they're supposed to do. They want to work hard. They want to earn their keep, but they also want to live the lives they want to live, not someone else wants to live. And what we did successfully in the 19th was we moved the needle there. We convinced people it's the small government people, the common sense people who really are like you and will represent you. And I think there's a lot of room to do that in this state, even in some of the places you mentioned, even in Issaquah, even in the close suburbs of Seattle. I think there's the ability to speak plain common sense about crime, about raising kids, about schools, what we want out of schools, about taxes, frankly, and cost of living, how much it costs to live in this state. I think that we can talk plain sense to people, and I think it will resonate in many parts of Washington as it has resonated in the 19th, which now is considered deep red. And now the deep blue people kind of ignore it. They've given up on it and moved on to other places. Well, let's do more of that. Within
the Republican Party, there's oftentimes been this conflict that exists in all parties, right? There's always factions within a party that they struggle for internal control to some extent. The history of when I've talked to people that were engaged in the 90s, right, it was usually more of the Christian coalition versus the mainstream Republicans. And then you had the mainstream Republicans versus Ron Paul, kind of, and then the Tea Party, right, versus mainstream Republicans. And now it's kind of been this shift lately of kind of this populist sort of Republican, for lack of a better term. Biden's going to call them the ultra megas, but really the people that I saw, just in 2020, with just people out at these car rallies, these boat rallies for Trump or something like that. There's a lot of that, but there's still this conflict within the Republican Party that exists. How do you anticipate navigating that inevitable conflict that exists in every political party, but particularly Republicans, that's in our state just like it is in all states?
Well, we've let those tensions really dictate too much of the identity of the party. And when you're bickering with each other, then the other guys get to say who you are. They get to set the frame. And one of the things I've learned working in Olympia is the most influential thing you can do is set the frame of debate. You can't always win every vote, especially when you're in a legislative minority, but you can move the frame of the debate. And we've seen this on a number of issues, but particularly lately with some of the drug issues, the Blake decision, which ran the risk of really decriminalizing the possession and use of fentanyl and other hard drugs in this state. Now, we were able to get a better solution to that. We were able to get to a situation just recently where there is some criminality to that. It's not decriminalized.
Right.
Now, we didn't get, those of us who are more conservative, we wanted to see that possession and use returned to a low felony, a Class C felony, as it had been before the state Supreme Court's Blake decision. We didn't get there. What happened was the compromise was to make knowing possession and use of those drugs a gross misdemeanor, but that's better than where it was heading to no crime at all.
Sure.
But we got to the gross misdemeanor by pushing for the C felony. So we were able to move the frame of the debate away from decriminalization and toward the middle, and we got a okay solution to that. I mean, we'll see how it is implemented. But on paper, a better solution by holding to our principles and moving the debate toward the middle. And I think there's a lot of room to do that on taxes, on some education, K-12 education reform. There's a lot of room to do that kind of shifting of the frame. And I think that ends up giving the people, whatever their political stripe, the people of the state, a better product, a better government, a better system than if you let one side pull all policy towards some rigid ideological extreme. And that's what I think common sense conservatives can do in Washington. And we need to be able to stand on our principles and move that frame back toward the middle in order to get the better results. And I look forward to doing that.
I have, and I've said for years, that when you compare the dominant two political parties, there's liberty and freedom right now only has a home on the Republican side of the equation. I mean,
sadly,
because I don't think that was always true. But certainly in recent decades, the shift has been where if you care about individual freedom and liberty, the old school idea of live and let live that did exist, I think, in many ways in the Democrat Party, that's long gone. I mean, it's the Democrat Party's become the party of rigid censorship and silencing of debate, and all these other scenarios.
Canceling. They are the cancel culture.
Make people lose their jobs because they won't take the jab, just all kinds of pretty extreme. If it's a flower shop, crush them and destroy them, I mean, it's been a really, I think, shocking for a lot of people, and that's many activists that you run into, and just like I run into out in the state, are former Democrats, many of them, who've come over.
They're the ones who elected me to the legislature.
Right.
All former Democrats who are like, we can't do this anymore. This is not America. This is not Washington.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's just them waking up. And so it sounds like the focus, if you were to, and I read your statement, and you're saying the same thing here in person. And we've known each other for years, so it doesn't surprise me, that this is, but what's the practical way that you believe that you can use the Republican Party to communicate that sort of message, not just to its members, but then out to the public?
Well, we are for what's good in Washington. We don't badmouth this state. It's a beautiful state. It's a beautiful place in the world to live. We are blessed in our state to live not only in a place that's geologically and physically beautiful. We live in the center of commerce in the world today. We are literally positioned to be a major successful player on the world stage, economically, militarily, geopolitically, in all the ways. So let's not screw it up. Let's recognize and celebrate the great parts of living in this part of the world, and not focus on this strange kind of bitter, negative, guilt-driven notion of who we are and what we are. We are not a danger to the world's environment. We are one of the cleanest, most efficient developed economies in the world. We don't need to ridicule ourselves and castigate ourselves for driving cars or for having the great hydroelectric dam system we have.
Right.
These are great things.
Right.
The hydroelectric dam system is a blessing.
Right.
It is a clean, reliable, steady source of energy for this state. And the idea that some of the dominant elected politicians in Olympia have created this idea that this is somehow a guilt, a matter of bad in the state and the world. It's nonsense.
Right.
And the idea that people should feel guilty and be punished for driving their truck to work,
or for having a cow, or for
and that
planting fields.
We need to pay $5 or $6 a gallon for gasoline or diesel fuel because we're guilty because we pollute. No. This is a state, and we live in a nation which can lead the world in the right kind of energy resources. You shouldn't have to pay $6 a gallon to drive your vehicle. And the idea that we have to do this to pay penance for who we are is just weird.
Right.
And what I want to do is talk to the people who don't want weird.
Right.
They don't want that. They want a government that takes better care of the roads, where you don't have 6 foot by 6 foot holes dropping out of bridges that cars are supposed to drive over. Where
or
you
just
don't
bridges totally falling apart.
Falling down.
Yeah, like the Skagit Canal. Yeah.
Where you don't have ferries, our great ferry system, so depleted of experienced deckhands and drivers that the ferries drive into sandbars and I mean, this is a testament to failed government.
Right.
They don't want a government where the state attorney general is hiding documents
repeatedly
from discovery in lawsuits like a Enron, like a white collar criminal, and getting caught by courts that are politically, frankly, friendly to that attorney general.
Very deferential to
who say, this is so bad, we can't, even though we're friends,
we can't give you a
let
pass
it go.
anymore.
We can't give you a pass.
Right.
You're not going to go to jail, but you're going to pay a $3 million fine.
Right.
Now, that attorney general isn't paying the $3 million fine.
No, we are.
Guess who's paying the $3 million fine?
Right.
And I think we can talk to the proverbial soccer mom from Issaquah and say, is this really what you want out of your state government? And that soccer mom is going to say to us, no, that's not what I want out of my state government.
And it's not been difficult generally for Republicans, I think, to identify some of the more extreme failures. And of course the focus is usually on Seattle, right, where you have just this extreme escalation in crime, this extreme escalation in drug addiction, the visible tent cities, or the kind of homeless industrial.
It's not even a tent city; it's tent everything.
It's
tent every sidewalk, every street.
Everything, everything, and this constant pouring of money into it. So it isn't so much about criticizing that, because I think most people recognize that there's something significantly wrong there. It's about providing this vision then to people that there's a better way of doing it, and it's not about doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that the Republicans can produce a pretty good message in that way. How do you get that message out when places like the Seattle Times or King 5 News or the Tacoma News Tribune or even Spokesman Review, where they function largely as appendages of the Democratic Party, in the way they communicate? What's the method that you would be able to use, or that you would want to use as a Republican chair to make a difference in that area?
Well, I've experienced firsthand some of the biases in the mainstream media in this state, and that's not new. And don't get angry about that. It just is.
Right.
So your message has to be even clearer and stronger, because if you pussyfoot around and if you equivocate about what's good and what can be better, it'll get lost in, think of the biases in the media as a filter. You just have to be able to speak loudly and clearly enough to move through that filter and get your words out as you want them to do. And no one does that perfectly, and your stumbles can be learning lessons there. But I think what we can do as a party and as an organization is be stronger and be clearer. I was just in Seattle a couple days ago at the Tiananmen Square Memorial Anniversary event.
Yeah.
And that's at the Westlake Park, right in what used to be the most dynamic kind of commercial zone where the old Bon Marché was, later Macy's and Nordy's, and all the good stuff was there. And that used to be where families would go at Christmas, to go before Christmas, to go shopping. And oh, Glenn, it doesn't look good at all.
No,
I mean,
it's a mess.
And like I said, that there's not a tent city. There are tents on every street corner.
Right.
And the tents aren't even the worst of it. There are people who have been using fentanyl, Trank, that version of fentanyl they call Trank, that, I mean, they literally pass out wherever they are taking it as part of the high, but it has effects on their bodies which are devastating. I mean, their fingers start to fall off. It's like leprosy.
Right.
And the flesh begins to fall off their legs and their arms. I mean, it's hideous. And this makes that area, which, I mean, in my life, I took my kids to that part of Seattle to go shopping before Christmas or around the holidays, into, it looks like Calcutta, India.
Right.
It doesn't look like Seattle.
Right.
And we can fix that.
Right.
That is a human-made problem.
Yeah, these are human-caused problems.
And
majority of the problems in Washington, are human-caused problems.
The Columbia River doesn't care.
Right.
The Palouse doesn't care.
Right.
The
rain doesn't care.
Where I come from, the rainforests don't care.
Right.
They're going to go on and do their thing. Nature is mighty.
Right.
Humans are small.
Right.
But we've screwed up our small bit of the process here. And it is not humane to treat people as they're being treated, to treat people who are addicted to opiates as they're being treated currently. It's not humane. And they call it, harm reduction or harm management. Well, leaving a person to literally crawl around in their excrement, in their filth, while they're passed out from taking a form of fentanyl that's so powerful it knocks them out cold.
Right.
That is not harm reduction.
No.
And
using them as an excuse to justify more grant grifting operations is certainly not the, But,
and every effort we make
to
audit that, Glenn, to look at where's the money actually going.
Right.
Whether it's homeless shelters, whether it's special ed in K-12, every effort we make to audit those processes and follow the money and see where it's going.
Right.
And is that homeless money getting to apartments where somebody can live, or is it getting absorbed in the grant grifting world? Every effort we make to track that gets vetoed by the current governor and his administration.
It does, and so you're stepping into the Republican Party, or you're running for this position in kind of a critical time. As a final statement that you would make for our viewers here, what do you want them to think about Jim Walsh? Basically, you're auditing for this position, because the vote isn't until August, of just that limited subset of people that have been approved, presumably by the local PCOs from the party from around the state. What is it that you want them to think about when they think about whether Jim Walsh should be chair or whether it should be somebody else?
Well, I turned my district by listening to people, and then by being a very forceful and loud voice for what the people told me they want out of government and the state and the system. And I will do that again and again and again. I'll do it for the people of my district. I'll do it for the people of the whole state. And I think that by listening to regular, normal people who just want what's good, and there's so much good,
Right.
that we will be able to be an effective voice for people who are discouraged, who are disenchanted.
If they need to reach out to you, where would they reach you right now if they want to talk to you between now and August?
Well, I'm very active in social media. You can follow me on Twitter. Just look up Jim Walsh LD19. It'll come right up.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook. I'm on a couple others, but most of the action's on Facebook and Twitter, and you can find me there. And you don't have to look too hard.
And you've done a lot of live streams on Facebook, a lot of videos if people want to know where you stand on the issues. So it's not hard to figure that out.
Not at all.
So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Jim, thank you so much for coming in. I'm honored to have you here. It's kind of like one of the first interviews since you've made this announcement.
It's an awesome studio, by the way.
Yeah. And with that, I just want to thank my listeners for watching. Feel free to comment on this video. If you have any comments down below, like and share this video with others. I'm sure that it'll be shadow banned as most of our videos are. And until then, thank you so much for watching. And just remember, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up. Representative Walsh is showing up when it comes to the state Republican Party in Washington State. And you can find a way that you can show up where you live as well. Thank you so much for watching.